The wind rattled loose shutters on the edge of Millfield's last untouched farmland, where Thomas Walker lived, in the creaking silence of memory. At 57, his frame was solid but slow, worn from 2 decades of service and 100 nights haunted by war. His home, a plain, weathered farmhouse, offered no distractions from the echo of gunfire only he could hear. The one soul who had stilled that inner storm was gone now. Max, his German shepherd of 13 years, had passed, with his head resting on Thomas's lap. Since then, the farmhouse had grown impossibly quiet. Thomas didn't fill the silence with people. He filled it with dogs. It started with Apollo, a skeletal shepherd with sad, intelligent eyes chained to a condemned porch. Something about the way the dog still held his head high stirred something old and aching in Thomas. He signed the adoption papers before he even realized his hand had reached for the pen. Apollo became an anchor, a reason to get up, to breathe, to eat. The nightmares didn't stop, but they softened. There was something about the warmth of a dog at his side that made survival feel manageable. And then came Hera. Then Zeus, bearing the scars of a dog-fighting ring. Then Athena. Then 10 more. Each broken dog came with a story. Each one reminded Thomas of someone left behind. He didn't just adopt them. He rebuilt them, retrained them, healed them the way no one had ever healed him. By the time the 14th arrived, the barn had become a kennel, the fields enclosed with fencing, and his days carved into careful routines: feeding, grooming, training, rest. The dogs responded with obedience, loyalty, and quiet companionship. Across the fence lived another kind of silence. 8-year-old Emily Richardson hadn't spoken since the icy night her parents' car vanished off Morgan's Bridge. Her body had survived. Her voice had not. Her grandparents, Martha and Howard, brought her to Millfield, hoping the slower pace would help. But therapy failed. Her eyes, once curious, now drifted through people like fog over glass, until she saw the dogs. From her bedroom window, she watched them move like soldiers, through drills, attentive, disciplined whole. Something in her stirred. She pressed her palms to the glass eyes, tracking each shepherd's motion, like they carried the answer to some question no one could ask. One morning, she pointed toward the fence during a walk. Her grandparents hesitated, but Martha said softly, "It's the first thing she's shown interest in since the accident. We can't ignore that." That afternoon, Emily and Thomas met. She didn't speak. He didn't ask her to. Instead, he guided Apollo to the fence and said, "He likes scratches behind the ear." Emily's hand trembled in the air. Then slowly it rested on the dog's thick fur. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and Thomas knew she was the second silent soul to find her voice among the broken. That evening, Emily ate every bite of her dinner. Martha held her breath as she cleared her plate, something she hadn't done in months, and only exhaled when Howard whispered, "She's coming back to us." The next morning, Emily stood at the fence before Thomas had even stepped outside. No words, just the same quiet presence, her eyes locked on the dogs. Thomas didn't ask why she was there. He simply opened the gate and began his routine. One by one, he introduced her to each dog. "This is Hera. She startles at loud noises. Gentle voice always. That one's Zeus. Big guy but sweet if you let him come to you. Athena lost her owner. Still waits by the gate at dusk." Emily said nothing, but her gaze followed each movement, each command, each name. When Thomas demonstrated the difference between a sit and a stay, she mirrored his hand signals behind his back, committing them to memory. He never treated her like a project, never asked her to speak, never mentioned her silence at all. He just included her slowly, gently, like a new recruit joining his pack. Martha began bringing her over in the afternoons. She sat on the porch with a teacup while Emily helped with chores, brushing fur, refilling water bowls, sweeping the kennels. The routine gave her structure, the dogs gave her calm, and Thomas gave her space. 2 months in, Emily picked up a brush without being asked and handed it to Thomas while he groomed Luna. Instead of taking it, he placed his rough, calloused hand over hers and guided the motion across the dog's coat. Back and forth, calm, steady, silent. That night, Emily spoke a word in her sleep, Luna. Martha dropped her teacup. Howard sat on the edge of the bed, tears in his eyes. She spoke, Martha whispered. She said the dog's name. The next day, Emily was back by the fence, and every day after that. She didn't miss a single visit. Thomas never said it out loud, but he started making adjustments, brushing the dogs closer to the fence line, keeping training sessions within view of her window. He knew. They both knew. There was a bond forming. One dog, one girl, one broken man, and something was beginning to mend. By spring, the girl had become a shadow in Thomas's world, always nearby, never intrusive. The dogs accepted her fully, now tails thumping against the grass when she appeared, eyes tracking her as if she were part of their command structure. She moved among them like a ghost with purpose, silent, but never lost. Each visit, Thomas spoke casually, narrating routines, telling the dogs backstories, like bedtime tales. Emily listened intently. She knew which dogs liked belly rubs, which flinched at sudden movement, which barked at thunder. One day, without warning, she knelt beside Hira during a distant storm, placing her small hand gently between the dog's trembling shoulder blades. Hira stilled. The thunder rolled on. Emily didn't move. She had learned to soothe them. Thomas noticed her sketching in a small spiral notebook. When he asked what she was drawing, she simply held it up. It wasn't pictures. It was charts, schedules, behaviors, names, commands, preferences. A logbook written in a child's careful hand. The kind a soldier might keep in the field. The kind Thomas had once carried in Afghanistan. He didn't say anything, just nodded once, solemn and proud. The changes were subtle, but unmistakable. Emily started humming very softly when brushing Luna. She smiled, just a flicker, when Zeus rolled onto his back for her without being asked. Her grandparents watched the shift in quiet wonder. No therapist had reached her like this. The pack had. Thomas, once invisible in town, now found himself the subject of uneasy whispers. The town was changing. New families, new fears. 14 German shepherds was no longer seen as therapy. It was seen as a threat. At board meetings, parents muttered about safety noise zoning. There had been a dog attack in the next county, and fear spread like wildfire. Still, Thomas kept training. He kept rescuing. He kept letting Emily through the gate, because every time she reached out her hand and a dog leaned into it, something invisible healed. October brought the town's annual meeting, a potluck-turned powder keg. Thomas wouldn't have gone, but Janet, the shelter manager, and one of the few allies he had had called that morning, with a quiet urgency. "They're bringing up your dogs tonight," she warned. "You should be there to hear it." So he went. He sat in the back of the gymnasium, arms crossed, posture rigid. Talks about potholes and festivals dragged on, but tension simmered just beneath the surface. Then Mayor Wilson cleared his throat and shifted papers. Concerns have been raised regarding the Walker property on Old Mill Road, and the gloves came off. A woman stood with a petition in hand. 14 German shepherds. That's a kennel, not a home. My kids are scared to play outside. Others nodded, murmured. Words like liability, nuisance, dangerous echoed around the room. Thomas said nothing, even as Councilman Davis held up grainy photos of Emily with the dogs taken without permission. her small figure dwarfed by fur and muscle even as whispers turned into accusations of neglect, endangerment, and mental instability. He stayed silent. A statue in flannel and denim, but inside, he was breaking. Janet rose to defend him. Then Howard Emily's grandfather surprised everyone by speaking up. "She hasn't smiled in a year," he said, "until she met those dogs." But Davis's next words hit like a mortar. "Round I've spoken to Child Protective Services." The mayor delivered the final blow. "We're proposing a new ordinance, maximum 3 dogs per residential home. 90 days to comply." Thomas stood and walked out without a word. But his back was ramrod-straight military steel, still holding his bones together. He had 90 days to dismantle the only thing keeping him alive, to rehome 11 dogs, to sever the bond that had stitched a child's heart back together. And no one, it seemed, cared what that would do to either of them. The cough had started months ago, a dry nagging thing that lingered like smoke in his chest. He'd blamed it on age, the cold dust from the kennels. Janet had noticed it during a supply drop and raised an eyebrow. Thomas waved her off with a half-smile. "Bronchitis," he said. "Stubborn, that's all. But stubborn doesn't make you gasp halfway through a walk with your dogs. Stubborn doesn't make your hands shake when you bend to fill water bowls." Eventually, even Thomas couldn't deny what was happening. He made an appointment, sat in the clinic, arms folded, while Dr. Miller listened to his lungs with practiced neutrality. But he saw the shift in her eyes. "I'd like to do a chest X-ray today," she said, "and some blood work." He didn't argue. Hours later, the words came down like a sentence. Stage 3 lung cancer. Already spreading. She talked about options: chemotherapy, palliative care, maybe a year, with treatment fewer without. But Thomas didn't hear percentages or timelines. He saw Apollo playing fetch for the first time, Hera trembling during storms, Zeus finally trusting enough to sleep with his head on Thomas's boot. They needed him, and he was running out of time. That same week, Child Protective Services arrived. A woman named Diane Matthews stepped from a silver sedan and introduced herself with a clipboard smile. "Just a routine follow-up," she said. Emily was grooming Luna, sorting brushes by size and shape, her face a mask of calm. Thomas led the agent around the property, answering every question with military precision: double gates, feeding schedules, dog rotation, supervision protocols. He had prepared for this, but nothing could prepare him for the phone call that evening. Martha's voice cracked as she explained. "They're suspending Emily's visits. They said we're showing poor judgment, that we could lose custody." Thomas set the receiver down gently. Then he sat in his chair as Apollo curled at his feet. "What happens to all of you?" He whispered into the silence. "When I'm gone." No one answered. But the quiet had never felt louder. The town's countdown ticked louder with each sunrise. 90 days, then 80, then 60. Thomas worked the phones like a man chasing breath. He called every German Shepherd rescue in a tri-state radius. The answer was always the same: no room. Too old, too many, too complex. They were full. He secured one placement for Hermes, the youngest, with a canine training program. A military buddy agreed to take Perseus. That left 9. 9 loyal, bruised, extraordinary dogs. And time was thinning like frost in morning light. The cancer advanced faster than expected. The pain sharpened. Sleeping in bed became impossible, so he moved to the recliner. Apollo never left his side. He hid the worst of it. Janet kept showing up, offering help, making calls. "I've tried every contact I know," she told him one afternoon, voice tight with frustration. "No one can take them. Not all. Not in time." Thomas nodded. He'd already begun researching humane euthanasia. The thought gutted him, but the alternative was worse. Shelters, cold cages, the wrong people, or worse, no one at all. "They deserve better than what I can give them now," he said quietly. and better than what's waiting after I'm gone. Janet's hand found his. She didn't offer hope. They both knew that would be a lie. He started writing letters, one for each dog. Medical notes, behavior records, personal quirks. He packed them with the same care he once packed deployment gear. Because this, too, was a kind of goodbye. Every breath came harder. Every morning with the pack felt more borrowed than the last. And somewhere beyond the trees that split their land, Emily watched from her window, silenced again, not by trauma this time, but by the quiet horror of what was slipping away. What no one knew, not Thomas, not the town, not even her grandparents, was that Emily had never truly left the dogs. Her silence had become camouflage. Each night after the house fell still, and the soft chorus of her grandparents' snoring filled the halls, Emily slipped through the back door with the stealth of a fox. She crossed the tree line barefoot, careful not to crack twigs or alert motion lights. And from the shadows, she watched the dogs beneath moonlight. Sometimes they slept curled like wolves in the kennel straw. Sometimes they stood alert as if waiting. The first night she just sat beneath the old maple near the fence, her notebook clasped to her chest. She didn't move, didn't speak. The second night she inched closer. The third she reached the fence. Luna saw her first, silver gray in the moonlight eyes like coals. But the dog didn't bark. She tilted her head curious, then padded quietly to the wire and pressed her nose forward. Emily knelt, waited, and slowly extended a hand. From that moment, a silent ritual began. She came every night, sometimes for an hour, sometimes until her eyelids fluttered shut in the grass. She brought treats hidden from lunch and mimicked Thomas's training hand signs, her small fingers flicking in practiced patterns. Sit, stay, down, good. The dogs responded. Not just one, all of them. She made her own clicker, just a bottle cap on a string, and the dogs understood it. They began to move not just individually, but as a team, responding to her hands, to her stillness, to her quiet strength. She observed, she recorded, she learned. She was training them. But more than that, she was becoming one of them, a member of the pack. In her notebook, Emily documented everything Zeus preferred to lead. Hera hesitated with sudden movements. Athena was most responsive to signals involving eye contact. She created combinations of gestures, guiding different dogs to different tasks, retrieval, guarding, coordination. It was more than obedience. It was trust. And one night, when she accidentally dropped her blue ribbon near the fence, something extraordinary happened. Athena located it. Perseus fetched it. Luna delivered it to her hand. She didn't command them. They chose to help. From that night forward, Emily referred to them not as the dogs, but simply the pack. They were no longer just therapy animals or rescues. They were hers, and she somehow was theirs. The dogs never barked during her visits. It was as if they understood the importance of secrecy, of silence. They became nocturnal students under her quiet command, learning not just tricks, but formation, role division, group response. Emily's presence grew bolder. She practiced with 5, then 8, then all 14 at once. She refined the signals, adjusted for the dog's strengths. Her silent system became second nature to them. A flick of fingers meant form a circle. A twist meant lie flat. A wave retreat. They obeyed her without hesitation. They were synchronized, coordinated, united. And as Thomas's health slipped further, Emily's strength quietly rose to meet what was coming. She didn't know how she knew, but she could feel the clock winding down. She could see it in the way Thomas moved slower, in the shadows under his eyes, in the cough that sounded worse with each passing night. So she prepared, not just for herself, for them all. The morning of the town council's final decision arrived too perfect for the dread it carried: blue skies, bird call, spring breezes. Thomas, hollow-eyed and breathless, had just finished feeding the dogs when the cars pulled into his drive. Janet's truck, the mayor's SUV, Councilman Davis, and behind them, the familiar silver sedan of Ms. Matthews from Child Services. He straightened his shoulders, ignoring the fire in his lungs. "We thought it best to inspect the premises on site," the mayor said awkwardly. Thomas nodded. He knew what this was, one last look before they passed sentence. He didn't know that across the tree line, a pair of young eyes watched it all unfold. Emily had overheard her grandparents the night before, quiet voices over dishes and sighs. "They're taking the dogs," Howard Martha had said. "They're all Thomas has left." Emily had lain in bed, clutching her notebook, feeling the panic bloom like a bruise inside her chest. She made her decision that night. As Martha and Howard drove her to school, she asked to use the bathroom, then slipped out the back and ran. The mile back to Thomas's farm was easy. She knew every route, every bush, every hiding place. When she reached the back fence, the officials were just beginning their inspection. Perfect. She opened the gate to the main exercise yard she had learned the latch weeks ago and stepped inside. 14 dogs turned toward her, ears up, alert. She raised her hand, and the pack moved as one. From behind the barn, Thomas rounded the corner and froze. Emily stood in the center of the yard, a fragile dot of blue and pink, surrounded by a wall of fur and muscle. 14 German shepherds had formed a perfect circle around her, their bodies angled outward, not aggressive, but vigilant, protective. "Emily," he cried, panic shattering his voice. The officials surged behind him, gasps, camera shutters, a voice calling 911. But Emily didn't flinch. Her hand rose again, small, steady. Zeus, the largest of the pack, responded. Without sound, he dropped to a seated position. One by one, the others followed. Another signal, this one, a subtle flick of her wrist. And they lay down, bellies to the ground, muzzles resting on their paws. Perfect submission. Perfect silence. Thomas stumbled. He couldn't breathe. The scene, impossible, breathtaking, tightened something in his chest until pain bloomed down his arm. He tried to call out to reach her, but his body betrayed him. He collapsed, knees buckling. Gravel bit into his skin. The sky spun. Through the tunnel of his fading vision, he saw her move. Calm, focused. Another hand signal. Apollo rose and padded toward him. She pulled a treat from her pocket, offered it gently. The dog nudged it aside and instead pressed his head against Thomas's chest. Then Zeus came, not to lie beside him, but to act. With deliberate force, Zeus placed his front paws on Thomas's sternum and began rhythmic compressions. Pressure, release, pressure, release. Chest compressions. Someone screamed, "Get that dog off him." But Emily's voice, raw and shaking, rang out for the first time in over a year. "Stop. They're helping him." Everything stopped. Every voice, every breath, every doubt. A silent child had spoken, and 14 dogs had become first responders. Zeus continued the compressions, precise and unwavering. Athena crouched beside Thomas's face, alert to every shallow breath. Apollo dashed to the house and returned, dragging Thomas's emergency kit in his jaws, an oxygen mask nestled inside. Emily knelt beside the man who had changed her life. Her hand brushed his forehead. "Luna," she whispered, her voice a little steadier. "Now get his medicine. You know where." The silver-gray shepherd darted off toward the dog door. Behind Emily, the adults stood frozen mayor, councilman, caseworker, all struck dumb by the impossibility of what they were seeing, an 8-year-old child orchestrating a medical emergency with nothing but gestures, memory, and love. Moments later, Luna returned with a small pill bottle, nitroglycerin. Janet administered it with practiced hands as Emily signaled Zeus to pause. The minutes stretched like hours until sirens broke the stillness. When paramedics arrived, They found not chaos, but choreography. 14 German shepherds formed a quiet semicircle around the scene, each positioned just out of the way, yet close enough to protect. Emily gave a final command. Stand back, but stay visible. The dogs obeyed. As Thomas was lifted onto the gurney, his gaze met Emily's. She didn't speak, but she didn't have to. Her eyes said everything. I will take care of them. Until you return. Then the ambulance doors closed, and the girl, once silent, stood surrounded by a pack who had chosen her. She was no longer just the quiet child next door. She was their voice now. Millfield Memorial's waiting room buzzed under fluorescent light. Janet sat beside Martha and Howard, while Emily perched quietly at the edge of her chair, notebook closed in her lap. Her face was unreadable, older somehow, like part of her had stepped forward into something too big to name. 3 hours passed before Dr. Miller emerged. Thomas is stable, she said, voice calm, but waited. The heart attack was severe, and the cancer. It's progressing. We've placed him in a medically induced coma to allow his body to rest. Martha's hand flew to her mouth. Howard closed his eyes. Janet nodded, once fighting tears. Only Emily remained still. Dr. Miller crouched to speak to her directly. Emily, do you understand what this means? Emily looked up. Her voice, though hoarse, was firm. He might not come back. And the dogs, they might lose him too. The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and inescapable. Later that night in the hospital cafeteria, the conversation turned from medicine to logistics. Who would care for the dogs? Could they stay on the property? Would they be separated? Janet was blunt. I can handle them short term, but long term, it's too much. The town still wants them gone. Councilman Davis hesitated. What we saw today was exceptional, but zoning laws still stand. Ms. Matthews added, their behavior was impressive, but Emily's safety is my primary concern. Prolonged exposure to that many animals, especially after trauma, raises serious questions. Emily, quiet, until now, set down her juice. They're not dangerous, she said softly. They're heroes. She turned to her grandparents. If he doesn't come back, I can care for them. Emily, Janet began gently. You're just a child. Then help me, Emily said. Find homes. Keep them together if you can. But don't let them be forgotten. Thomas didn't ask for help because he was scared of what would happen to them. Her voice cracked for the first time. They saved him. I won't let them be abandoned again. The room fell into a heavy silence. For the first time, everyone saw not a fragile child, but a leader. A bridge between man and animal, between silence and survival. The girl who spoke for the pack. And that was the beginning, not of an ending, but of something entirely new.